Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Progenitor. This is the podcast where we go over a director's entire filmography, talk about themes, scenes, shots, pacing, and give a brief review all within 30 minutes. So let's get started. As you guys know, we are currently going over the director Zack Snyder's entire filmography. We've already done Dawn of the Dead, and we just recently did Frank Miller 300, the comic book adaptation. Next up, guess what? He continues his dive in the comic book world. This next one is considered a masterpiece. Time magazine called it one of the 100 greatest novels, not even graphic novel. It's considered a novel by Time magazine. But yes, this is Zack Snyder's adaptation of... This was one of those properties that was considered unadaptable. And guess what? Zack Snyder did it. This next book / this next adaptation is Zack Snyder's Watchmen. Now, as I mentioned before, we will be going over the director's cut, not the ultimate cut. So it doesn't have the tail of the Black Freighter, but the director's cut is just as good. Now, before we get into it, let me just give you a brief intro about Watchmen. The comic book was actually written by Alan Moore, artist Dave Gibbons, and it's considered one of the greatest. Unfortunately for me, I think it's one of the wordiest comic books ever, but it's beautiful. It's got some great art. Dave Gibbons is great. It's one of those comics that was deconstructing the idea of comic book heroes, trying to get to the bottom of what really makes them tick, the darkness, what really happens to these guys when they don't wear their masks. Are they just crazy people or not? And for me, I'll be honest, the comic book is sort of a slog. So I was really, really happy to watch the movie, because the movie is actually just a very good adaptation in that it moves quickly, although it is almost 3 hours. I think it's 3 hours, and it hits all the points, but I don't know, I felt like it wasn't as dense. And for some people that's a good thing, for some people that's a bad thing. It's such a panel-to-panel adaptation, but at the same time, it changes things up. So basically, it starts with the comedian, he's murdered, and then you have Rorschach and Night Owl and Silk Spectre and Dr. Manhattan, and this is the group of Watchmen. And Rorschach and Night Owl are kind of like the guys instigating sort of the investigation. More so Rorschach, he pulls Night Owl in. And while this is happening, there's a side story with Dr. Manhattan and Silk Spectre as their relationship is falling apart. Then Silk Spectre gets in a relationship with Night Owl while Dr. Manhattan goes to space because he's feeling tormented by a lot of allegations towards him. And he's feeling even more alienated, because if you think about it, he's sort of a god. And you get all these guys' origin stories too, basically. Dr. Manhattan was a nuclear physicist, and he got in an accident which gave him superpowers, basically. He can basically construct and reconstruct and atomize things. Like, he has the powers of creation and destruction, right? He can blow someone up with just his hand outstretched. And basically he ended the Vietnam War. Richard Nixon is still president for over 3 or 4 terms, and the Russians are building up their nuclear arsenal. So there's so many things going on, but at the heart of the story is basically a murder mystery. And Night Owl, Rorschach, and Silk Spectre end up banding together, and they find out one of their old teammates, Ozymandias, has been plotting this elaborate plan to make the world come together, essentially, by creating a common enemy. Now, in the comic, the common enemy is a giant squid, which to me is like, what? Why would you do that? But it kind of makes sense in the bigger picture, especially if you start watching Watchmen, the TV show. But in this film, Zack Snyder and his writers, they changed the ending a bit so that it's actually Dr. Manhattan who's the bad guy. Or at least Ozymandias makes it look like Dr. Manhattan is the bad guy. And either way, I like the Dr. Manhattan twist of him being the quote unquote bad guy rather than the giant squid, but I get it both ways. Now, as I said, it's almost a panel to panel adaptation. It's such, you know what, let's get into my mini review, because I have so much praise for this film. I remember watching it when it first came out, and this is sort of like the beginning of the hype of Superman or superhero movies, right? Dark Knight came out 2008, Iron Man as well, and they hadn't created the superhero team movie, but you know, you're leading up to that. And this is the movie that kind of deconstructs not only superheroes, but the superhero team, breaking it down to its bare minimum, right? This movie is about how the team falls apart, then comes back together, falls apart, then comes back together, and then saves the world at the end of the day, right? And saves the world in a way that you don't expect them to, by creating the mayhem to band the world together. So, in terms of the film, you have to understand a bit of the comic book, right? So, I remember when this film was coming out, I read the comic book, I was like, dang man, Alan Moore loves his words. And I like terse comic books. I do like comics that have less words and use more of the visuals. But I get it. Anyways, I love this film. I love the costume design. I love the production design, the way they create this world. And on top of that, the performances are really good. If there's any fault in the performances, it's kind of my fault. Like Malin Ackerman, I haven't seen much of her work, but I did not like her as the Silk Spectre that much. After every time viewing this film, it gets better and better, but I do think she is the weakest of the main cast. And other than that, you know, I really enjoy this film a lot. And there's great fight choreography. A lot of the dialogue is word for word. I love voiceover. I love noir. And this movie pretty much does everything right. Now, if you want a shot-for-shot exact remake or exact adaptation, as I mentioned before, they did change certain things, especially the ending. So you're not going to get that completely, but it is a really, really great movie. There's a great soundtrack by Tyler Bates, back for his third film. And yeah, overall, I really, this is, if we talk about rankings, this is basically on the top for me in terms of Zack Snyder's work. Now, let's get into a bit of the cast and the crew. We'll start with the crew. Director Zack Snyder, executive producer Deborah Snyder, Thomas Tull, Wesley Collar. Now, as I mentioned before, Deborah Snyder is back with Thomas Tull. They have a new addition, Wesley Collar, who's going to be joining them on more projects going forward. This is his first collab. This is Deborah Snyder and Thomas Tull's second collaboration. And then you have screenwriters Alex Tse and David Hayter. Now, this is their first and only collab with Zack Snyder. Now let's move on. Cinematographer Larry Fong. This is his second film with Zack Snyder. Editor William Hoy, second film. Composer Tyler Bates, third film. Production designer Alex McDowell. So this is Alex McDowell's first film with Zack Snyder. He will be back though, and like I said, this puts you in a strangely twisted 80s, 90s world where Richard Nixon is still president, and And then you get these scenes where he's with Henry Kissinger, and they're in the doomsday. You have the doomsday clock showing nuclear war is imminent, and just the production design is beautiful. Going for visual effects, John, they call him DJ, so I'm gonna call him DJ. This is his second collab. Costume designer Michael Wilkinson, second collab. And then we have stunts by Doug Chapman. And this is Doug Chapman's second collaboration with Zack Snyder. He also worked on stunts in 300. So, alright, let's get into the cast. And I think this cast is overall stellar, except for a couple of things. So I'm gonna again complain about Malin Ackerman. Not my favorite actress. She does okay, but she's a little wooden. Patrick Wilson. Here's the thing. Patrick Wilson is a great actor, but he's too damn good looking for Night Owl. If you watch or read the comic, Night Owl is kind of a pudgier, older, nerdier looking guy, and Patrick Wilson is just so damn handsome and good looking. So it's kind of like, I wish he put on a little more weight, because let's just say it, Patrick Wilson can pull this off, but he's just too damn good looking. Other than that, you have Billy Crudup as Dr. Manhattan, great. And if you have the director's cut, you do see blue penis. Matthew Good is Ozymandias. He's perfect as a very, very egotistical, very cocky actor. Gives the right vibe, and he's got a sort of menace to him, so you're not really sure what side he's on. Then you have Jackie Earle Haley. I think this is perfect casting. Number one, he looks scary. Number two, he's got the right voice. He's got the right physical acumen, like the right move. You kind of feel how dangerous he can be. Jeffrey Dean Morgan as a comedian, great performance. This guy is just stellar. I wish he had more work. He actually plays Thomas Wayne in Batman v Superman. For the rest of the actors, they don't really show up in any of Zack Snyder's films again, other than Billy Crudup and Patrick Wilson. They have bit cameos in Batman v Superman. Patrick Wilson is the voice of the president, and Billy Crudup is Flash's father in Zack Snyder Justice League. And then you have Carla Gugino as Sally Jupiter, the mother of Silk Spectre, and she's in a number of Zack Snyder films, so we'll get into that later. But yeah, overall, you have a stellar cast. And then Stephen McHattie, he's actually the first Night Owl. There's two Night Owls. Matt Frewer actually plays the supervillain called Moloch the Mystic. This is actually his second film with Zack Snyder as well. He was in Dawn of the Dead. And guess what? Eli Snyder. Eli Snyder is Zack Snyder's son. He was in 300 as the young Leonidas, and he's in this movie as the young Rorschach. As I mentioned, we already went over the collab, so no need to go over that. Wife's Corner. I'm thinking of taking this out because I didn't have her watch this one. She probably would not have enjoyed it at all. Themes. Alright, let's get into it. Empower female characters. Yes, Silk Spectre is actually the linchpin for Dr. Manhattan. And he realizes that the creation of Laurie Jupiter, who's played by Malin Ackerman, is such a miracle because you had Comedian, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, and you had Sally Jupiter, played by Carla Gugino. And at the beginning of the movie, you saw that the Comedian tries to rape Silk Spectre during a party. And they get split up from the team. He tries to rape her, and another hero breaks up the rape and, just stops it. So later on, you find out that there was something between them, and they came back together years later, and they actually consummated their relationship. No rape was involved. They actually made love and had a child. And for that forgiveness to happen between the comedian and Sally Jupiter, and to create Laurie Jupiter for Dr. Manhattan, that's a miracle. How can that forgiveness come about, and you can create such a beautiful creature, and then he finally realizes, oh, being alive is a miracle. Being alive is something special. And from there, that her character follows throughout the whole film, just trying to find herself. A lot of this film is about her finding herself and finding her identity, which is kind of why I wish there was a stronger performer. Because let's be honest, Carla Gugino could have played this character instead of the mother, and would have played it just as well. And so there are empowered female characters. Nature space is a hostile and uncontrollable environment. Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, definitely. You have a battle in Vietnam. You have New York City in the 80s, and not just New York City, but this United States of America that still has Richard Nixon, that still has Kissinger after 3 or 4 terms. And there's violence on the street. There's a lot of gangs going on. On top of that, Dr. Manhattan at one point gets pissed off at the human race and decides to go to Mars. And at one point he brings Laurie Jupiter and forgets she can't breathe in space. So she almost dies. So yeah, definitely nature space is a hostile and uncontrollable environment. The only way to survive is to adapt. And this is where we get to Ozymandias. The only way to survive this nuclear war is to adapt and figure out how to bring everyone together, right? So this ties in with, violence doesn't solve a thing, brains do. So Ozymandias comes up with this crazy plan. If there's one common enemy for the entire world, the world should be able to band together and attack it as one and find peace, right? So he's using his brains and he's using his survival techniques, and he creates this plan. And this also goes to money corrupts, because he has a lot of money. Ozymandias is one of the smartest people in this world, and then he used his brains to amass a lot of wealth. And because of that, his mind is a bit corrupted to create this idea of blowing up like certain areas in the world that are highly populated, pretending it's Dr. Manhattan's power. And he does that in New York City, he does it all over the world, in Russia, blah blah blah. And it diverts the nuclear war to band the people together to basically try to find Dr. Manhattan and make sure he never does this again, kind of thing. So his plan works. Unfortunately, the real world, after what we've seen with COVID, there's no way the real world would band together if there was one common enemy. So if an alien decides to come, I think we're worse for wear right there. Distrust of authority, yeah, a lot of people distrust Richard Nixon, and he's one minute away from pulling the trigger on the nuclear arms. Anyway, sacrificing oneself for the greater good, that's exactly what Dr. Manhattan decides to do. He sees Ozymandias' plan in fruition, and at the very end he says, you know what, this is what needs to be done, and I will leave this world so that it can find peace. So he leaves. Inspire people out of their apathy. Basically, yeah, that's all that Ozymandias does. Everyone is so afraid, they don't know how to do anything anymore, and he creates a plan that actually brings all the Watchmen back together, and basically brings the world together. And yeah, there you go. The rise of a hero starts with struggle and tragedy. Ding, ding, ding. Yep, again, you get the origin story of Dr. Manhattan, a simple accident, and he becomes a blue radiated superhuman, and he loses all his humanity. So that's a simple thing. But even you look at Rorschach, what he had to go through. There's a sampling of his origin and how he grew up through poverty, and how his mom was a whore who didn't want him and wished she had an abortion. And then slowly you start to see why his psyche is split in between the two, and why he hides behind a mask. And so, yeah, there you go. Human form is perfect. Well, I mean, Dr. Manhattan is the perfect superhuman. And he's blue, he's got abs. And then you look at all the other superheroes, they all have these really well done costumes that pinpoint their muscles and their abs and everything. So, yep, there you go. And then you can run, but you cannot hide forever. I think that's a huge thing, because these heroes, they were asked to leave and to not show their faces, but at the end of the day, they knew that they had to band together and find out what was going on. The few versus the many. Ding, ding, ding. You have a few heroes coming together and realizing that what they have to do is fight the world. But they're not fighting the world, right? They're trying to save the world by making tough decisions. And yeah, so there you have it. Now let's talk about some shots. And here's the problem. This movie has so many shots. It's 3 minutes and 15 seconds to 5 minutes and 20 seconds. This is the entire comedian fight scene at the very beginning. And it's a great fight scene. You don't know who the bad guy is, but it's so well choreographed. You have like some slow-mo shots. You always have the speed ramping. 5 minutes 41 to 11 minutes 16 seconds. This is a really cool opening credit scene played with Bob Dylan's song. And basically it's just showing the Watchmen and the way the team has changed and formed throughout the years and how it's changed. And I'm just going to keep going. At an hour and 6 minutes and 37 seconds, you see Dan Driver, Night Owl 2, played by Patrick Wilson, and he breaks a gangster's arm. You see like fragments of it breaking. And then 1 hour and 11 minutes and 21 seconds, Dr. Manhattan arrives on Mars after he's gotten pissed off at everyone. And I have this whole section where it's about John becoming Dr. Manhattan. It's a very awesome origin story. And then you have this 1 hour 30 minutes 39 seconds to 1 hour 31 minutes and 8 seconds. Ozymandias is fighting this assassin, and you get a slow motion shot of his secretary's fingers getting blown off. I thought that was really cool. And you have this really awesome fight scene at a prison, because at one point Rorschach is tricked into a trap, and the cops are at this trap, and he gets arrested and put in prison. And a lot of the villains in prison are people that he put away with Night Owl, so they're all pissed off and want to kill him. So Night Owl joins Rorschach with Silk Spectre, and they have a fight scene in the prison at 2 hours and 7 minutes and 18 seconds to 2 hours and 9 minutes and 26 seconds. Oh, I like this. And this ties to our first director. At 2 hours and 35 minutes and 52 seconds, if you look at one of Ozymandias' monitors, because it's showing all the news and the TV channels going on and the security cams that he has. But at this very moment, it's playing the 1984 commercial directed by Ridley Scott, where it's for Apple. It's for the Apple computer. And at 2 hours and 52 minutes and 18 seconds, Dr. Manhattan decides to blow Rorschach up to sacrifice for the greater good. So, because Rorschach is like, no, people cannot live in this lie. We need to tell them the truth. But the rest of the Watchmen are like, no, I think we should keep it the way it is. Let the people band together and let there be a common enemy. And Rorschach is like, no. So Dr. Manhattan makes a tough decision and blows him up, basically. So, as you can tell, there's a lot going on in this movie. It's super dense. I can barely even get to the movie's 3 hours. So it's really hard to basically break down point by point. But it's super dense. It's beautiful. If we talk about the shots, like I said, you have speed ramping, you have the desaturated lighting, you have the dingy grays, you have the shadows over accentuated, you have beautiful production design, you have these abs and strong muscles, speed ramping all over the place. You can tell that this is a Zack Snyder film. And going forward, these things are very apparent. And there's a lot of gore, and there's a lot of physical abuse in the fights. They're very, very detailed in what bones are breaking. So he wants to show that there are consequences to this life, that there's pain involved, that there's actual destruction. And I think he does great with this film. But next up, guess what? Zack Snyder moves away from the comic book movie world, and he goes to a different world. And it's a very, very interesting choice. And what I like about this next film is he's diving into the world of animation. And if you guys don't know, this next film is called Legend of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole. And it is an animated movie, and it does not look like it's streaming anywhere for free. Last I checked, though, it was on Max, but I already have it. I bought it on Apple. At the time, it was $14.99, but get a copy. It is a romp, and I can't wait to talk to you about it with you guys next time. So, remember, it's called Legend of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole. And we will be talking about this next time. So, talk to you guys soon. Bye.